Drag her through the mud before the royal carriage arrives. Caleb Monroe's order cut across the Willow Creek courtyard just as the first black and silver banners were being raised over the gate. Rain had fallen all morning, turning the packed dirt into a wide brown field of cold mud, and Emily Carter felt it soak through the hem of her old light brown dress as two pack guards forced her toward the center of the yard. Her torn gray cloak clung to her shoulders, heavy with water, and one worn leather shoe nearly slipped free as the crowd opened around her. No one reached out. No one said her name. They only stared as if silence could keep them clean. Caleb stood near the front steps of the pack hall with his polished boots safely on dry stone, his jaw set in the proud, public anger of a man who had already chosen the truth he wanted. Beside him, Vanessa Hale held a torn strip of royal festival cloth against her chest, her pale face arranged into hurt innocence, though Emily had seen that same cloth in Vanessa's hands less than an hour ago near the decorated archway. "You embarrassed this pack," Caleb said, loud enough for the families under the awnings to hear. "You ruined the welcome banners for the Northern Wolf King, and you will admit it before his carriage reaches our gate." Emily lifted her face. Mud streaked one cheek, and rain gathered on her lashes, but her voice stayed quiet. "I did not cut the banner." A few people shifted. Someone near the bakery porch whispered that she should just say what Caleb wanted. Someone else muttered that an Omega without family should know when to bow. Emily heard it all. She had spent years hearing the soft things people said when they thought a lonely girl should be grateful for scraps of mercy. Caleb's eyes hardened. "Then you will kneel until honesty finds you." He gestured, and the guards pulled her down into the mud before the whole pack. The cold hit through her dress, sharp enough to steal a breath, but Emily pressed her hands into the ground and kept herself upright. She would not collapse for their comfort. She would not make a lie easier to swallow by looking guilty. Around her, the courtyard had been dressed for honor. Ribbons on the fence, white flowers tied to lamp posts, silver bowls ready for the royal welcome. Yet all of it looked false beside the way they treated the person they thought no king would notice. Vanessa stepped forward beneath the shelter of the porch. "Just admit you were jealous," she said softly, sweetly, for the crowd. "No one will think less of you than they already do." A small laugh moved through part of the gathering, thin and mean. Emily looked at the ruined banner in Vanessa's hand, then at Caleb's clean boots, then at the mud under her own palms. Will a lie make the banners cleaner? The laughter died in pieces. Caleb's face flushed, but before he could speak, the road beyond the main gate changed. Hooves struck wet stone. Wheels rolled through the rain. The royal carriage had arrived early, black as midnight, trimmed in silver, drawn by 4 northern horses, and it did not stop beneath the decorated arch. It passed Caleb, past Vanessa, past the waiting welcome line, and came to a slow, deliberate halt beside Emily in the mud. The carriage door did not open immediately. That made the courtyard worse. Silence spread through Willow Creek in a slow, visible wave, moving from the gate to the porch, from the porch to the awnings, from the awnings to the muddy center where Emily Carter knelt with rain in her hair, and the whole pack, watching her become a question no one wanted answered. Caleb Monroe's face changed first. The proud anger he had worn for the crowd stiffened into calculation. Vanessa Hale lowered the torn royal cloth just enough to hide the sudden tension in her hands. The carriage stood beside Emily like a judgment carved in black lacquer and silver trim, its wheels sunk slightly into the wet ground, its northern horses breathing pale mist into the rain. Emily did not dare look up too quickly. She knew how power worked in Willow Creek. It did not arrive for girls like her. It arrived above them, past them, through them, and if they were lucky, it did not step on their names on the way. She had learned that lesson in the small room behind the stables where she slept, with a roof that dripped in 2 places and a window that would not close during winter. She had learned it before sunrise, carrying feed buckets almost half her weight across frozen ground while the stronger wolves prepared for ceremony. She had learned it in the kitchen, where she washed the pans no one noticed unless one was missed, and in the sewing corner, where children brought torn sleeves because Emily never scolded them for rough play. She had learned it in the stable stalls, with old horses who trusted quiet hands more than loud commands. That morning, while Vanessa and her friends decorated the royal archway, Emily had been in the far stable with a young bay horse trembling under a fever blanket. She had missed breakfast to cool its neck with damp cloths and whisper nonsense until its breathing slowed. A stable boy named Noah had seen her there. So had little June Miller, the baker's daughter, who had brought a white handkerchief to wrap around a carrot and pretend it was a royal gift for the horse. Then Vanessa screamed about the torn banner. Caleb called for Emily, and truth became the first thing dragged into the mud. The carriage step lowered with a quiet metallic sound. Every head bowed except Emily's, because she was still looking at the ground, watching rainwater gather around her fingers. A pair of black boots appeared at the edge of the mud, polished but already touched by the dirty water Caleb had tried so hard to avoid. Then a dark cloak moved in the corner of her vision, heavy wool lined with silver fur, falling still in the rain. The man who stepped down did not rush. He did not ask who had organized the welcome. He did not greet Caleb. He looked first at Emily, then at the torn cloth in Vanessa's hand, then at the two guards still standing too close to her shoulders. "Step back from her," King Alexander Frostvale said. His voice was not loud, but the courtyard obeyed before anyone decided to. The guards moved away. Caleb bowed so quickly his coat nearly brushed the wet stone. "Your Majesty, forgive the disorder. We were correcting a pack matter before your arrival." Alexander's silver eyes returned to Emily. "A pack matter?" he repeated. The words were calm, but the rain seemed colder around them. Emily finally lifted her head. Mud streaked her cheek. Her gray cloak hung crooked, and her knees ached from the cold ground. Yet the king did not look at her as if she were the stain in the courtyard. He looked at her as if the stain was what had been done to her. "Who made you kneel?" he asked, before they asked what happened. Emily did not answer quickly, not because she did not know, but because the truth had lived so long beneath other people's voices that it needed a moment to stand. Rain slid from her hair to her jaw, cold and steady. The courtyard waited. Caleb waited with the stiff patience of a man certain rank would rescue him. Vanessa waited beneath the porch, one gloved hand crushing the torn cloth she had displayed so proudly minutes before. King Alexander Frostvale did not rush Emily. He stood in the mud beside her as if a royal courtyard and a muddy pack yard deserved the same respect when an innocent person was being questioned. That alone made something in Emily's chest tremble. "Beta," Caleb ordered it, she said at last. Her voice was quiet, but the silence carried it. "He said I had to admit I ruined the welcome banner before your carriage arrived." Caleb stepped forward. "Your Majesty." The Omega was found near the damaged decorations, and her history of resentment toward higher families is known. A familiar shame moved through the crowd, not because they believed him fully, but because they had heard similar words before and let them become convenient. Emily looked down at her hands. Mud filled the lines of her palms. She had used those hands to scrub Willow Creek floors, to lift soup pots, to pull burrs from horses' manes, to tie little June Miller's bootlaces when the child's fingers were too cold in winter. Resentment would have been easy. Hatred might even have been fair. But Emily had never had the luxury of letting bitterness do her chores. Alexander turned his head toward Caleb. "Found near the damaged decorations is not the same as guilty." Caleb bowed again, lower this time. "Of course, Your Majesty." But she refused to explain herself clearly. Emily lifted her eyes. "I tried." The words came out softer than she wanted. Then she remembered the royal carriage stopping beside her instead of passing to the clean stones, and she made herself continue. "I said I was in the stables." No one listened. At the edge of the crowd, a small movement broke the frozen line of faces. Little June Miller stepped from behind her mother's skirt, white handkerchief clutched in both hands. The cloth was streaked with mud now from the fall in the crowd, and her brown curls were damp with rain. "She was," June whispered. Her mother reached for her, frightened, but the child took one more step. Miss Emily was with Clover, the little horse. Clover was shaking, and Miss Emily stayed with her. Vanessa's face tightened. Children misunderstand time. June's lower lip trembled, but she held up the handkerchief. "I gave her this for Clover." Before the bell rang, before the banner, a murmur moved through the courtyard, different from laughter now. Alexander looked to the stables. "Bring the stable boy." No one moved until his gaze swept the pack guards. Then one hurried away. Caleb's confidence thinned at the edges. Emily saw it, and the sight did not make her cruel. It only made her tired. She had known the truth. June had known the truth. Maybe others had known parts of it too. But in Willow Creek, Truth needed permission before it could speak for an Omega. The guard returned with Noah, a lanky, stable boy of about 15, soaked from the rain and pale with fear. He stopped several feet from the king and bowed awkwardly. Alexander's voice softened by a fraction. "Tell me where she was." Noah glanced at Caleb, then at Emily in the mud, and shame crossed his face. "In the stable, Your Majesty. With Clover. She never went near the banner arch." The courtyard seemed to inhale all at once. Vanessa looked away too late. Alexander turned toward her hand, toward the torn royal cloth she still held. "Then someone in this yard owes the truth an introduction." Alexander's command did not strike like thunder. It settled colder than that, clean and undeniable, until even the rain seemed to fall more quietly over Willow Creek. Vanessa Hale looked at the torn cloth in her hands as though it had become heavier while everyone watched. Caleb Monroe stepped half a pace toward her, not enough to look guilty, but enough for Emily to see the secret line between them. She had lived too long among people who lied politely not to recognize the shape of protection when it moved. "Your Majesty," Caleb said. Lady Vanessa was distressed when the damage was discovered. She should not be questioned as if she were responsible for an Omega's misconduct. Alexander's silver eyes shifted to him. "The Omega has 2 witnesses. The lady has a torn banner in her hands, and no explanation I have heard." A murmur crossed the courtyard, then died when Caleb turned his head. Emily remained kneeling in the mud, but something had changed around her. The ground was still cold. Her cloak was still soaked. Her hands were still dirty. Yet the shame no longer belonged only to her. It had begun to move, slipping from her bent shoulders toward the clean boots and dry porch where it should have been standing all along. June Miller stood near her mother, clutching the muddy handkerchief, eyes wide but braver than many adults around her. Emily noticed the child shivering and, without thinking, reached toward the fallen edge of her own gray cloak. It was wet and useless for warmth, but she still tried to pull it aside to cover June's hands if the child came closer. Alexander saw the movement. So did the crowd. Even in the mud, even while accused, Emily was still trying to care for someone smaller. The king looked at the handkerchief, then at Emily. "You returned that to her?" he asked. Emily blinked, surprised by the question. She dropped it when people pushed forward. "While you were being punished?" "It was hers," Emily said simply. Mud does not change that. The words carried more power than she intended. A few faces in the crowd lowered. The baker's wife drew June closer, but this time not to silence her. She looked at Emily with something like apology beginning too late. Alexander removed one black leather glove, then took the torn royal cloth from Vanessa without touching her hand. His expression did not shift, but his attention sharpened. "This edge is clean cut." One of his northern guards stepped forward, tall and silent beneath a silver-trimmed cloak. Alexander handed him the cloth. "Compare it to the tools near the arch." Vanessa's composure cracked. It was raining. Many people were near the decorations. Noah, still pale beside the stable path, swallowed hard. "Miss Vanessa had her embroidery knife this morning." Caleb turned on him with a warning look, but Alexander spoke first. "Let him finish." Noah's voice shook, but he did not stop. "She was trimming ribbon at the arch. She said the royal colors looked dull and wanted the silver cloth moved higher. Emily was not there." Vanessa's cheeks flushed. "I never meant to damage it." The confession slipped out dressed as defense, but the courtyard heard the truth beneath it. Caleb closed his eyes for a single second, and that was enough. Alexander looked from Vanessa to Caleb. So a mistake became an accusation. Vanessa's lips trembled, but not with the kind of sorrow Emily trusted. "I was afraid the king would think Willow Creek careless." Alexander looked at Emily kneeling before them, then back to Vanessa beneath the porch. "And you thought cruelty would look more honorable?" No one answered. Rain tapped against the silver carriage roof. Emily felt the cold deep in her bones now, but she did not lower her head. For the first time, Caleb seemed unsure what to do with an Omega who had stopped carrying everyone else's guilt. Alexander turned to his guard. "Help her stand only if she allows it." The guard approached and paused, waiting. That pause nearly broke Emily more than the mud had. "Permission," in front of everyone. She nodded once. The guard offered his hand, and Emily rose slowly, unsteady but upright, while mud fell from the hem of her dress back to the ground that had been used to shame her. Alexander faced the pack. "Remember this sight. Not because she was brought low, but because she stood without borrowing a lie to do it. The courtyard watched Emily stand, and for the first time that day, no one laughed. Mud still clung to her dress. Rain still traced cold paths down her face. Her torn gray cloak hung heavily from one shoulder, and her worn shoes sank slightly into the softened ground. Nothing about her looked clean by Willow Creek standards, yet the silence around her had changed. It was not pity. Pity kept distance. This was recognition arriving late, uncertain, and ashamed. Alexander Frostvale stood beside the royal carriage with rain darkening the silver fur at the edge of his cloak, his black northern armor catching the gray light beneath the clouds. He looked across the packyard, from Caleb's polished boots to Vanessa's lowered eyes, then to the white flowers tied to the fence for a welcome ceremony that now looked painfully false. "Bring a cloak," he said. Several servants moved at once, but Alexander lifted one hand. Not from the pack hall. The movement stopped. He reached back into the carriage himself and drew out a blackened silver royal cloak, heavy enough for northern snow, lined with soft fur and marked at the clasp with the wolf crest of Frostvale. A murmur swept through Willow Creek. Emily stiffened before she could stop herself. She knew what coverings could mean when offered by powerful people in public. Sometimes they were kindness. Sometimes they were a way to hide the evidence of what others had done. Alexander paused, reading the hesitation in her shoulders as clearly as if she had spoken. "May I place this over your shoulders?" he asked. The question moved through the courtyard more sharply than any command. Emily looked at him, then at the cloak, then at the mud on her sleeves. "It will get dirty." Alexander's face did not soften, but something in his eyes did. "Then it will carry the truth with you." Her throat tightened. She nodded. He stepped close enough to set the cloak around her, but not close enough to crowd her, settling it gently over her soaked shoulders. The warmth came first, sudden and almost painful against the cold. Then came the weight, not of ownership, but of being publicly claimed by justice when everyone else had tried to abandon her to shame. Caleb's voice broke the silence. "Your Majesty, this is an internal misunderstanding. Willow Creek can correct it without royal embarrassment." Alexander turned, and the cloak clasp flashed silver at Emily's throat. The embarrassment began when an innocent Omega was dragged through mud to protect pride. Vanessa flinched. Caleb swallowed. Alexander's guard returned from the archway with a small embroidery knife wrapped in cloth. Its handle matched the silver pattern on Vanessa's gloves. No one needed the guard to say more, but he did. "Found behind the flower stand, Your Majesty." Vanessa's face crumpled into panic. She tried to make elegant. "I only cut too close to the seam. I did not mean for it to tear." Emily looked at her, waiting for an apology that did not come. Vanessa looked instead at Alexander. "I was afraid." Emily's voice came quietly from beneath the royal cloak. "So was I." The simplicity of it stopped Vanessa cold. Emily did not raise her voice. She did not ask for punishment. She only stood there, muddy and shivering, and let the truth occupy the space where lies had been. Alexander looked toward June and Noah. These two spoke when adults would not. Their names will be recorded as witnesses under Northern protection. June's mother bowed her head, tears mixing with rain. Noah stared at the ground, relieved and terrified at once. Caleb tried one last time. "Your Majesty, the royal visit was meant to honor alliance." "Alliance without justice is decoration," Alexander said. He faced the entire pack, his voice carrying to the farthest awning. "Willow Creek is under formal review for the treatment of Omegas, falsified accusations, and abuse of local authority. Until the review is complete, no one here will command Emily Carter." The sound that followed was not a gasp, not exactly. It was the sound of a crowd understanding that power had changed hands without anyone raising a weapon. Emily looked down at the mud on the royal cloak's edge and realized Alexander had not covered her shame. He had made the whole pack look at it until they understood it was theirs. Alexander's order did not end the rain, but it changed how every drop sounded in the courtyard. Before, the storm had seemed to belong to Willow Creek, muddying the ground beneath Emily as if the whole sky had agreed to shame her. Now the rain touched the royal cloak on her shoulders, darkened the silver fur, and fell from the wolf crest at her throat like a record being written in water. Caleb Monroe stood very still, trapped between the pack he had commanded and the king who had just removed his voice from Emily's life. Vanessa Hale clutched her empty hands together, the embroidery knife no longer hidden, the torn banner no longer useful. Around them, the crowd shifted with the restless discomfort of people discovering that silence had not kept them innocent. Alexander turned to one of his northern guards. "Secure the banner, the knife, and the statements from both witnesses. No one speaks to the children without royal presence." The guard bowed and moved at once. June's mother pulled her daughter close, but this time her eyes lifted to Emily with trembling gratitude instead of fear. Noah stood near the stable path, shoulders hunched beneath his wet jacket, and Emily knew how much courage it had taken for him to speak in front of Caleb. She started toward him, then stopped, unsure whether she was allowed to move freely now or whether freedom needed another announcement before her body believed it. Alexander noticed. He did not command her forward. He only stepped aside, clearing a path through the mud. That small movement did more to steady her than a hand would have. Emily crossed the yard slowly, the royal cloak heavy around her, mud pulling at her shoes with every step. When she reached Noah and June, she looked first at the child's muddy handkerchief. "I am sorry I could not keep it clean," she said. June shook her head fiercely. "You gave it back." Emily felt the words settle deep. "Not clean. Returned." Maybe some things mattered more after they had touched the mud and still found their way back to the right hands. Noah swallowed. "I should have said something sooner." Emily looked at him, at his pale face, at the fear still sitting behind his eyes. "You said it when it mattered." Behind her, Caleb's voice rose, carefully controlled but thinner now. "Your Majesty, with respect, allowing an Omega to comfort witnesses during an active review may influence testimony." Emily closed her eyes for half a breath. Even kindness, in Caleb's mouth, became suspicious when it came from her. Alexander answered before she had to turn. "If honest comfort threatens your version of events, Beta Monroe, then your version is already weak." A low murmur moved through the crowd, but no one laughed this time. Emily turned back and saw Caleb's authority shrinking in the space his own words had built. Alexander looked toward the pack hall. "Bring every work ledger that names Omega duties for the last 3 winters. Bring housing records, discipline records, and any complaints dismissed by pack officers." The pack clerk, a narrow man with ink on his cuffs, went pale. "All of them, Your Majesty? All of them." Emily's breath caught. This was no longer only about the banner. No longer only about Vanessa's lie or Caleb's punishment. The mud beneath her feet had become an opening, and through it, something buried in Willow Creek was beginning to show. Caleb seemed to realize it too. Northern Review will disrupt the entire pack. Alexander's gaze moved over the decorated archway, the white flowers, the torn space where the banner had been. Good. A system comfortable with dragging innocence through mud should be disrupted. Emily looked down at the cloak around her shoulders. For years, Willow Creek had taught her that survival meant staying useful, quiet, and small. But now the king's carriage waited beside the mud instead of the clean stone road, and the Northern Wolf King had not asked her to disappear into gratitude. He had made room for her truth to stand in the open. When Alexander turned back to her, his voice lowered enough that only those near them heard. "Miss Carter, you may return to the stables, the kitchen, or any place you choose for shelter while the review begins. Or you may sit in the carriage, away from the crowd." Emily looked toward the stable, where the young bay horse waited under its blanket. Then she looked at the courtyard that had watched her kneel. "I would like to check on Clover first," she said. A flicker of respect touched Alexander's silver eyes. "Then the royal review begins in the stable." And with that, the entire power of the North followed Emily Carter through the mud toward the smallest, gentlest proof of where she had truly been. The stable smelled of rain-soaked hay, warm animal breath, and pine soap from the bucket Emily had left by the door that morning. It was the first place in Willow Creek that had ever felt less like shelter than responsibility, and yet stepping inside with the royal cloak over her shoulders made Emily see it differently. The narrow aisle, the patched boards, the lantern with the cracked glass, the stall door she had repaired twice with borrowed nails. All of it had carried her quiet work while the pack pretended she had no worth beyond blame. Clover lifted her head from the bedding, a young bay horse with soft eyes and a damp blanket across her back. Emily forgot the crowd at once. She crossed to the stall, moving slowly so the filly would not startle, and touched the back of her fingers to the horse's neck. "Hey, sweet girl," she whispered. "You are warmer now." Alexander stopped at the stable entrance instead of following too close. His guards remained behind him, filling the doorway with northern silver and black, but the king's attention stayed on Emily's hands. Not the mud, not the torn cloak beneath his own. Her hands. The same hands Caleb had tried to make look guilty. The same hands that had spent the morning saving the proof no one wanted to hear. Noah stepped forward with a folded cloth. She was shaking worse before, he said, voice still nervous. Miss Emily stayed with her for almost 2 hours. Alexander looked at the stall floor, the damp cloths, the bowl of cooling water, the small bundle of herbs tied with string. And the banner was damaged during those 2 hours? Noah nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. A royal guard wrote it down. The sound of pencil against paper seemed louder than rain on the roof. Caleb stood near the stable wall, careful not to step into the wet straw, his face arranged into patience that had begun to look like fear. Vanessa had followed only as far as the open doorway, unwilling to bring her fine blue dress near the scent of animals and work. Emily glanced at them once, then returned to Clover. She needs dry bedding before night, she said quietly. And warm mash, if the kitchen has oats left. Caleb gave a humorless breath. Even now, she gives orders. Alexander turned to him. No, she gives care. You simply do not recognize it unless it is serving you. The words settled over the stable with more force than shouting. Emily kept her head bowed over Clover's neck, but she felt them anyway, a shield placed not around her body, but around the meaning of what she did. The pack clerk arrived breathless with ledgers hugged to his chest. 3 books. 1 for duties. 1 for housing. 1 for disciplinary notes. His hands trembled as he offered them to a northern guard. Alexander opened the first ledger on a feed barrel. Emily saw her name immediately, written again and again beside tasks that had filled her days from before sunrise till after dusk. Stable cleaning, kitchen washing, laundry, fence mending, sickroom duty, festival preparation, emergency night watch. No pay recorded, no rest day marked, no family sponsor, no complaint accepted. The letters blurred for a second, and Emily hated that they did. She did not want Caleb to see grief and mistake it for weakness. Alexander did not ask if she was hurt by the ledger. He did not make her perform her pain for the court. He simply closed the book halfway and said, "This is not duty. This is erasure with tidy handwriting." The clerk looked down. Vanessa's voice came faintly from the doorway. "Every pack has arrangements for lower-ranking members." Emily looked up then. Rain silvered the world behind Vanessa, making her fine clothes look strangely thin. An arrangement should still remember a person is living inside it, Emily said. Clover nudged Emily's sleeve, and the small movement drew every eye back to the stall. The filly trusted her. Noah had told the truth. The ledger had kept records even when people had not kept honor. Alexander looked at Emily beneath the muddy royal cloak and spoke with calm finality. "Miss Carter, as of this moment, you are under royal protection as a witness and as a wronged citizen of the North." Caleb's mouth tightened. "She belongs to Willow Creek." Alexander's silver eyes turned cold. "No, she belongs to herself." Willow Creek only forgot. The words stayed in the stable long after Alexander spoke them. She belongs to herself. Emily had heard her name used as a command, a warning, a burden, and a convenient answer to problems others created, but never as something protected by law. For a moment, she could only stand beside Clover with one hand resting against the filly's warm neck while rain softened against the stable roof. Caleb looked as if the boards beneath him had shifted. Vanessa's face had lost its polished confidence, leaving behind a frightened pride that did not know how to apologize without losing shape. Alexander opened the housing ledger next. The pages smelled of damp leather and ink, and Emily saw the corner of her small room described in 2 words, stable annex. No mention of the broken window. No mention of winter drafts. No mention of the nights she slept in her cloak because firewood was counted by rank. The duty ledger named her everywhere, but the housing ledger barely allowed her to exist. Alexander read in silence, then turned the book so his guards could copy the entries. 3 winters, he said. No wages. No formal rest. No advocate. No review. The pack clerk swallowed hard. Those were local customs, Your Majesty. Custom does not become justice because it survives long enough to feel normal. Emily looked down at the royal cloak around her shoulders. Mud had dried along the hem in rough brown streaks. She thought of the courtyard, of the laughter, of Vanessa asking whether jealousy had made her ruin the banner. "I was not jealous of the welcome," Emily said softly. Everyone turned toward her. She had not meant to speak, but now that the words had begun, they deserved to finish. "I wanted it to go well. I brushed the carriage road yesterday. I polished the silver bowls. I tied ribbons until my fingers cramped. I wanted Willow Creek to look honorable, even if it never looked at me that way." Noah's eyes lowered. June, standing at the stable doorway with her mother, held the muddy handkerchief against her chest. Vanessa stared at Emily as if kindness had accused her more sharply than anger could have. Alexander closed the ledger. "That is why your lie failed, Lady Hale. You blamed the one person still trying to protect the dignity you were willing to throw away." Vanessa's mouth trembled. "I did not think it would become this." Emily looked at her through the soft lantern light. "You thought it would become me." The stable fell silent. The sentence was not loud. It did not need to be. Caleb stepped in, his voice clipped. "Your Majesty, enough humiliation has been traded today." Lady Vanessa made an error. "I overcorrected. The pack can make compensation." Alexander looked at him. "You are still trying to purchase the end of truth." He gave a quiet order, and one of his guards sealed the ledgers with a silver cord. Beta Caleb Monroe is suspended from authority pending Northern review. Lady Vanessa Hale will provide a sworn statement before sunset. Emily Carter will leave this property under royal escort if she chooses, and Willow Creek will not contact her without permission. Emily's heart beat hard beneath the heavy cloak. Leave. The word opened before her like a road after years of locked gates. She looked at Clover, then at Noah, then at June, who had been brave with a muddy handkerchief in both hands. "What about the others?" Emily asked. Alexander's silver eyes settled on her. "Which others?" She lifted her chin toward the ledgers. "The names written like mine. The one still working while everyone calls it custom." Something in Alexander's expression changed. Not surprise, not pity, but a deeper respect. "Then we take the ledgers with us," he said. "And we begin with every name." Outside, beyond the stable doors, the royal carriage waited beside the mud. Not the decorated arch. Emily understood then that the king had not come only to rescue her from one lie. He had stopped because the road itself had led him to the place where Willow Creek buried its truths. Emily left the stable only after Clover had fresh bedding, warm mash, and Noah's promise to check her before nightfall. That was how she knew the choice was real. No one rushed her. No one grabbed her arm. No one told her gratitude should move faster. Alexander waited outside beneath the gray afternoon sky, while Northern guards carried the sealed ledgers toward the blackened silver carriage. Rain had softened to mist, turning Willow Creek into a blurred painting of mud, banners, and faces that did not know where to look. The white flowers tied along the fence drooped under the weather, and the torn space above the archway hung open like a missing truth. Emily stepped into the courtyard wrapped in the royal cloak, her old light brown dress still stained beneath it, her worn shoes still carrying the mud they had tried to make into shame. This time, the crowd parted before she reached them. Not with laughter, not with command, with a silence that felt almost like learning. June stood near the baker's porch and lifted the muddy handkerchief in farewell. Emily smiled at her, small but real. Noah stayed by the stable door, one hand raised awkwardly, his courage still new and trembling. Caleb Monroe stood on the steps where he had given the order that began it all, but his polished boots no longer made him look powerful. They only made him look distant from the ground everyone else could finally see. Vanessa Hale watched from beneath the porch, her fine blue dress untouched by mud, her face pale with the cost of being seen clearly. Emily did not need either of them to beg forgiveness in front of the pack. Not yet. Apologies made under the weight of a king could sound too much like survival. What she needed was written in the ledgers now, sealed under Northern law, impossible to sweep back into the stable annex where forgotten girls were expected to sleep quietly. Alexander stood beside the carriage door, tall and cold in his black armor and silver-furred cloak, but when he looked at Emily, his voice was steady rather than commanding. "You may ride inside as a protected witness," he said. "You may also remain here tonight under guard if leaving feels too sudden." Emily looked toward the pack hall, then the kitchen window, then the narrow path to the small room behind the stables. She thought leaving would feel like escape. Instead, It felt like grief folding itself carefully so it could be carried. "If I stay," she said, "they will spend the night teaching themselves how to make this smaller." Alexander's eyes sharpened with quiet approval. "Then we do not let them." He offered his hand only to help her into the carriage, and only after waiting for her nod. Emily took it. His hand was gloved, steady, and respectful, and the step into the royal carriage felt taller than it was, as if she were crossing not from mud to polished wood, but from one version of her life into another. Inside, the seats were dark leather, warm blankets folded neatly beside them, and a silver lantern burned with a soft northern glow. Emily sat by the window, still wrapped in the cloak that carried both mud and honor. Alexander entered after her and sat across, leaving space between them because he understood that rescue did not give him ownership of her fear. As the carriage began to move, Willow Creek watched from the ring. The wheels rolled first through the same mud where Emily had knelt, then onto the stone road beyond the gate. She looked back only once. Caleb and Vanessa grew smaller beneath the sagging banners, while Northern guards remained behind with the ledgers, witnesses, and a royal order that would reach every hidden corner of the pack. Alexander followed her gaze. "A girl who keeps kindness in the mud," he said quietly, "is worth more than a pack that hides lies behind banners." Emily turned toward the road ahead, where the mist opened between dark pines and the north waited beyond the hills. For the first time in years, she did not wonder who would blame her when morning came. She wondered whose name they would restore next.